It starts with a woman in her late 60s standing alone in her kitchen, staring at a bank receipt she can't even bring herself to touch. Her hands are trembling, her chest feels tight, because on that receipt is the number she never imagined she would see, $187,000. Her entire retirement, gone, not stolen by a masked stranger in the night, not taken at gunpoint, but sent willingly, lovingly, to the man she truly believed was going to be her husband. Except he never existed. And the money? It didn't go to the charming man in the photos. It went to someone else, someone real, someone living, someone who knew exactly what he was doing, a man named Emmanuel Kwame. If you want to understand how nearly $4 million vanished from U.S. victims through romance scams, you're going to want to stay with me until the very end of this story. Before we dive in, comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support is what keeps us bringing you these chilling, educational true crime stories that protect people from falling victim to online predators. Now, sit back. Let's begin the story in full. Romance scams don't start with money. They start with emotions. And for many victims, especially older Americans living alone, online companionship feels like a lifeline, a connection, a promise that they are not forgotten. That's where this story begins, not in a courtroom, not in a bank, but in homes across the United States, places filled with quiet hopes and quiet loneliness. One of the earliest victims in this case was a widowed woman from Arizona. She lost her husband 7 years earlier and had spent most days in silence since then. Her children lived out of state. Her friends were aging, and one evening, after hesitating for months, she finally created a profile on a dating website. She wasn't looking for anything grand, not a fairy tale, just someone to talk to. And that was all it took. A message, a compliment, a handsome photo, a man claiming he worked overseas, a gentle, attentive tone she hadn't felt in years. It felt real. It felt safe. It felt like the beginning of something she deserved. But thousands of miles away, in a very different world, someone was watching her messages, tracking her responses, studying her loneliness. Someone who understood exactly how to turn affection into profit. That someone was not the romantic soldier she thought she was speaking to. It was someone she would never meet, never speak to, and never even know existed. His name was Emmanuel Kwame. Pause for a moment and tell me in the comments, have you or someone you know ever encountered a suspicious online relationship? Your awareness might save someone else. Between 2019 and 2023, a shadowy network operated across borders, using love as bait. They crafted entire identities using stolen photos. They held long, intimate conversations with victims, sometimes for months. They promised commitment, marriage, and future plans. They created emergencies, fake surgeries, frozen bank accounts, business deals gone wrong. Victims were emotionally entangled before they even realized it. But in every one of these scams, there came a moment when the scammer would say something like, "I trust you more than anyone. I need your help. Please, just this once." And when victims sent money believing they were saving the person they loved, they were unknowingly sending their life savings to one of more than a dozen bank accounts controlled by Emmanuel Kwame. He wasn't a sweet talker. He didn't send the messages. He didn't fake love. But he was at the end of the line, the one who received the money, moved it, cleaned it, transferred it across borders, and made sure the victims would never see it again. Federal prosecutors later discovered that over $3.8 million romance scam proceeds passed through his network. He personally handled $3.3 million. That's not the profile of a small-time mule. That's the sign of a professional financial operator, someone deeply embedded in fraud ecosystems. Victims came from all over the United States. Retirees, widows, divorcees, middle-aged professionals in lonely marriages, people battling isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the criminals knew exactly who to target. These victims had something valuable: emotional vulnerability. One victim, a 72-year-old man from Ohio, believed he had fallen in love with a woman running a small business overseas. They talked every day for 8 months. She told him she dreamed of moving to the U.S. to be with him. She sent him photos, voice notes, and plans for their future. He sent her more than $90,000, except she was never real. And every cent of his money ended up in one of the accounts linked to Emmanuel Kwame. Another victim, a disabled veteran from Texas, lost nearly $50,000, funds he had set aside for medical costs. He thought he was helping a woman escape a toxic situation. Instead, he unknowingly funded organized crime. The emotional damage ran even deeper than the financial ruin. Victims felt ashamed, humiliated, and afraid to tell family members what happened. But behind that shame was a sophisticated system, one designed to exploit human kindness for profit. And Emmanuel Kwame was right at the center of it. Romance scams are notoriously hard to trace. The emotional manipulation is invisible. The scammers are usually overseas, and victims often delete messages out of embarrassment. But investigators had one thing the scammers couldn't hide: the money trail. When unusually large wire transfers began hitting the same set of accounts, U.S. banks filed Suspicious Activity Reports, SARs. The reports went to federal agencies, and agents noticed a pattern. Multiple victims from multiple states, sending large sums to the same bank accounts with similar descriptions, often within the same time periods. Those accounts were linked to Emmanuel Kwame. But here's the twist. At first, investigators thought he might be a victim himself, a person being used by the scammers to receive funds. It happens often. Money mules are sometimes groomed the same way victims are groomed romantically. But Kwame wasn't groomed. He wasn't tricked. He wasn't being used. He was cooperating, opening accounts proactively, moving funds immediately, concealing origins, transferring money overseas in amounts engineered to evade detection thresholds. He wasn't a pawn in the scheme. He was a willing and active player. This changed everything. Investigators pulled phone records, travel logs, and international wire data. They mapped connections between Ghana and U.S.-based accounts. They found ties to known fraud hotspots. The puzzle pieces were aligning. By early 2023, they had enough for their first major move. A sealed criminal complaint was filed. The hunt for Kwame officially began, but what investigators uncovered next was far bigger than anything they expected, because Emmanuel Kwame wasn't operating alone. He was part of a system, one that stretched across continents, involved multiple co-conspirators, and revealed shocking truths about how romance scams really work behind the scenes. And when agents finally confronted him, what they found would turn this case from a simple financial crime into a chilling example of just how far organized scam networks will go. Stay with me as we are about to expose the network, the arrest, the courtroom showdown, and the final sentencing. When investigators finally confronted the financial puzzle surrounding Emmanuel Kwame, they expected to uncover a simple laundering trail. What they didn't expect was a network far more organized, more structured, and more international than anything they'd seen tied to romance scams in years, because Kwame wasn't just a participant, he was a bridge linking U.S. victims to West African cybercrime networks that had perfected the art of emotional deception. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Agents began tracing who Kwame communicated with: phone logs, encrypted messaging patterns, transfer schedules, digital breadcrumbs that led across borders. They found coordinated timing of transfers, repeated use of money funnel accounts, communication with known fraud hubs and Ghana transactions designed to avoid financial reporting laws, evidence that Kwame personally opened accounts specifically for fraud proceeds. One discovery stunned investigators. Kwame managed accounts that had received funds from over a dozen victims, none of whom knew each other, all of whom believed they were helping a different romantic partner. This was not a coincidence. This was choreography. And each scammer, the lover, the soldier, The businesswoman, the engineer on an offshore rig, operated like separate actors in a theater production, while the money quietly flowed into the same backstage vault. That vault belonged to Emmanuel Kwame. But even then, one question remained. Why would someone willingly become a financial safe house for romance scammers? The answer was more human than expected, and more chilling. Investigators studying Kwame found that he wasn't ignorant or manipulated. He was calculating. He understood. U.S. victims were vulnerable. Romance scams were lucrative money laundering, carried lower risks than romance scamming itself. Using cross-border financial channels made tracing harder. Most victims were too embarrassed to report the crimes early. He knew loneliness was a weapon. He knew trust was a currency. And he knew he could profit without ever sending a single romantic message. But beyond the financial motives, there was something deeper: greed mixed with emotional detachment. Receipts would show victims sending their last dollars, their savings, their future, and Kwame would move the money within minutes, sometimes seconds, without hesitation. No remorse, no pause, just the next transaction. To him, it was business. To the victims, it was heartbreak. And that contrast is what made this case so devastating. For nearly 4 years, Kwame played his part flawlessly. He structured transfers. He avoided large lump sums. He used multiple accounts to scatter transactions. He withdrew in small increments. He shipped funds overseas in a web of transfers. He was careful. But he made one mistake. One account, opened under his real name, received funds from 3 victims within 48 hours, all from different states, all for suspiciously similar amounts. Banks flagged it. Investigators noticed the pattern. This was the crack in the armor. From there, federal agents subpoenaed full bank statements, IP login histories, international transfer data, ATM withdrawal footage, passport travel logs. Piece by piece, the portrait of the operation came into focus. And then came the turning point. A cooperating witness. Someone connected to the broader scam network, someone whose identity remains sealed, pointed directly to Kwame as the designated receiver, the man trusted to funnel money back to Ghana. This was the evidence they needed. In March 2023, federal agents moved. They obtained a sealed criminal complaint. Then, quietly, they unsealed it days later. Kwame was taken into custody. When agents approached him, he was calm. I almost resigned. When they searched his possessions, they found multiple smartphones, bank account access devices, transaction journals, receipts, connecting him to victims, cash bundles, consistent with unreported withdrawals. But the most incriminating evidence came from digital forensics. Agents recovered deleted chats with overseas co-conspirators discussing incoming transfers, bank shutdown fears, moving funds before they get suspicious, coordinating withdrawals, and even the emotional manipulation tactics used on victims. There was no doubt now. Kwame wasn't an innocent messenger. He was a willing partner in organized emotional exploitation. In October 2023, facing overwhelming evidence, Kwame made a decision. He pleaded guilty. The charge, conspiracy to receive stolen money. But when the victims' stories were read aloud in the courtroom, the air grew heavy. One victim lost her home. Another had to return to work at age 74. Another attempted to take his own life after realizing he had been scammed. Their pain had weight, and now that weight was on display. Prosecutors painted a clear picture. For years, he knowingly received millions in romance scam proceeds from vulnerable victims and moved the funds in ways designed to conceal the crime. The judge listened. The victims listened. And Kwame stood expressionless. But the sentence he received would change the rest of his life. On May 3, 2024, Judge Carol Bagley Amon delivered her decision. 48 months in federal prison, $3.3 million forfeiture, $3.8 million restitution. The courtroom was silent. Emmanuel Kwame would serve 4 years behind bars for his role in a crime that stretched across borders, ruined lives, and drained the savings of vulnerable Americans. But even that sentence didn't erase the emotional scars. For the victims, romance wasn't just stolen. Hope was stolen. Trust was stolen. Dignity was stolen. And the ripple effect was enormous. Communities became more cautious. Banks strengthened fraud detection. Investigators used this case as a model to track future romance scam operations. Families became more involved in checking on elderly loved ones. The case of Emmanuel Kwame wasn't just a crime story. It was a lesson, a warning, a reminder that love, when manipulated, can be one of the most dangerous weapons in the digital world. And even after the sentencing, one truth still lingered. There are many more Kwames out there, which is why stories like this matter. If you stayed with me through this emotional journey, thank you. These stories aren't just entertainment. They are shields, protecting people from falling victim to the same traps. Please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps this channel keep spreading awareness, keep educating, keep shining light into the darkest corners of online crime. And most importantly, it helps protect someone else from losing their money, their trust, or their heart. Stay safe, stay alert, and we'll see you in the next story.